It may look to people that the question is now what is going to happen as people see the fact that they've created two sides, each of which firmly believes that they're winning. Logically, it would seem that they would start to see how both sides are in fact part of the greater whole. As Turkey and several other countries have now joined both sides, this means that NATO countries in the West can continue to support Ukraine against Russia, and Russia and Iran can both support both Hamas and Hezbollah against Israel, as they have created a situation which is divided by these proxy wars, yet a new sense of unity is emerging, and this idea is secured by the US and China formally embarking on a new working relationship. But the real question people should be asking is, how did they do it? As the world moves through the point of this happening, think about what things must look like to the public as it comes out the other side. That is, we must have done things which will look bad in retrospect, but then governments on all sides don't want the revisionists telling them that things could have been done in another way. So there is the idea that the less the public can know, the better. The solution to this problem is to enable them to focus on the future and how to create a better system, which solves the problems of this phase and moves on to the next. But there is also the idea that people are starting to see the big picture anyway, and so the question with regard to this is, how can we use this to create a better state of affairs and create change which would not otherwise have been able to occur, to lay the new intellectual foundations for the Anthropocene period. So we can see that it's been taken for granted that the world has had to work in a certain sort of way over time, during the periods in which human civilizations have so far evolved, which are officially now known as parts of the Holocene period of life on Earth. Given that it is an evolving state of affairs, it has been up to us to create a situation out of it. Whereas the world evolving into the Anthropocene has now taken large amounts of myths, religion, imperialism, lies, scandals, faith, conformity, and secret police monitoring the state of affairs so they can create feedback so governments can make political progress, which moves the situation forward. So what we're seeking to do is move towards a more transparent state of affairs within government, but now how do we do this given everything that has occurred? And this is the problem with the world not just entering the Anthropocene, because we can make the world enter the Anthropocene because we can describe how the state of affairs has reached that point. But we're having problems now with the state of affairs which this now has to evolve out of. So thus the way the world works has become a huge contemporary issue which governments now want to play down as it comes to the question over how they did it. Because for a start, the people in the West believe they're all free from the type of politics which exists in communist countries, and those on the other side believe they're solving the world's problems by counterbalancing the irresponsible elements of Western civilization, as the West has been wrapped up in its traditional belief in Christianity and the divine plan for global affairs. Hence, the imperialist mentality has been allowed to rise within that. This is why death to the West became part of the terrorist mentality, something which you might notice has become more moderate now, and that phase of global society, having expressed itself, has given way to the multipolar environment. So this has mysteriously appeared because of action taken involving the UN, and people didn't get much of an explanation of how all that happened. And it's more of a case of exposing social injustice. Firstly, because what has happened to the people in the factions involved, all of whom believe they were right to do what they did. And secondly, the need to create a political course of action which moves the situation forward from where we are now. And we do not have a shortage of social injustice now in Gaza. So the new phase of global society can theoretically express itself. But the question arises as to whether or not we actually did this to ourselves, and to a certain extent we did. But on the other hand, we've been caught up in the evolving situation we call a species, so individuals cannot entirely question the whole, as they need to be part of the existing state of affairs in order to survive. So the new problem is that maybe in 10 or 50 or even 1,000 years' time, people will still not know how we got to where we are unless we understand all this. And the longer time goes on, the more tricky it gets to follow because the more events have occurred. This implies a whole load more secret police and secret societies and deep state activities and conspiracies, and people won't know what's happening for generations to come unless change occurs and get caught up in all the fake news. Yet things are changing on the internet as it is making people more intelligent, and while we may not believe everything we see on it, exposure to a wider variety of ideas is enabling us to recognize more patterns in human behavior. So the new common enemy seems to have become those people in government and societies who do not want to allow change to occur, creating fear across societies in their quest for political and social control. Certain people in governments, religions, political movements, and workplaces want to keep people lower down in society from even aspiring to seek the knowledge to achieve higher positions, especially when there is competition for promotions. Thus, lower down society people must be encouraged to succeed by creating a future with better education systems and more of a desire to become fully human than the blind belief in social systems we've seen in the past, which has led to the assumption that the middle classes all know what's happening and they're all doing the best job for everybody that they can. The momentum will always keep going to get the direction of global affairs evolving out of what they are now, but people are learning more to initiate points of change to avoid wars and other forms of direct conflict, as this is in line with the way the situation is evolving as a whole. However, there are still some very prejudiced people in the world who try to discourage the idea that we can have social equality and instead encourage the view that populations should believe firmly in hard work and that political conformity equals food, shelter, water, political stability and improvement over time. It is an easy view to slip into, particularly if people need those things, as there is no alternative in politics in many places. And this means there's no competing model of society to stimulate improvement, thus leading to revolutionary groups appearing and the ability to create insurgencies. Hence, we may consider the current problem with human societies as lying in the fact that they evolved exclusive directions which can then be easily manipulated and controlled by people who understand dialectics and global affairs, who can form groups which can control politics, as there is always a way of explaining to people why things need to be the way they are, no matter how badly governments are performing. As new protocols are continually introduced into society directed from the top downwards, the role of the UN can thus be downplayed and everything interpreted through the sovereignty of nations. In other words, the situation on the big picture is interpreted for us in terms of what it should mean to us as citizens on the national level. And most people, it appears, are not expected to see anything outside of their own borders. They can, if they wish, they can even aspire to become educated, but the educated view always states that people need to find out how to fit in with society. Since the revolution appeared as a permanent political force, more people have seen that when tyranny is law, revolution is order. But while it has in the past very much been a case of people joining one side or the other, with this new centre ground, ideas are more mixed together and the lines between political agendas less clearly defined. We know there have been conflict of interest in the past, as the series of wars which led to the collapse of Europe into World War II, for example, led directly into the postmodern age. However, while the first part of postmodernity occurred, there was the distinctive end of each conflict before the next one began. Like at the end of the 1950 Korean War, it was divided between North and South, and then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, but then these ongoing proxy wars seem to represent the situation involving the two sides of the superpower alliances, stemming from the Big Five and the UN Security Council having reached a point where things can move forward in a way which incorporates the way humanity has evolved as a whole. So now we have the problem of Middle Eastern terrorism being solved, giving way to militant Islam in Hamas and Hezbollah groups. The connection with Africa unblocked through the replacement of governments in the Middle East, and things now going in the right direction as a whole, as Guterres would put it, but with massive corruption in society, conflict, contradiction, and all the signs that will eventually create the first galactic empire. With government staff all sworn into the Official Secrets Act, so they can't really say anything publicly, it's simply reassigned them to each new mission. This has meant that as the new situation led to the Ukraine war, nothing could be done about it. So, as Putin said, the relationship between Ukraine and Russia will heal, And the thing is that we could manage the situation using the staff that we had. But this is only so that superpowers can make way for the next round of global affairs, leaving Hamas to be used to raise the issue of everything that is wrong with the world. So how can the world system actually keep doing this? By having staff indoctrinated and managing citizens at the point of contact. That's why we have all these levels of complex hierarchy in the system, where only the level 1s and 2s are on the front line, but you can call the level 3 manager if there's a genuine problem. While the level 4 specialists advise the level 5 leaders, who are controlled like the captains of their own ships by the level 6 rule makers, level 7 generals and with their own brands or product lines, and level 8 field marshals oversee the situation from above and liaise with governments to assess where is safe and how to make new strategic moves. So we have the Ukraine war today, then we have the next crisis and the next, and the world is always on the brink of war due to the situation evolving, and nobody ever questions why. So people can never really get to find out how things are really occurring, because the way the world needs to be managed has to be this way. However, that is precisely what looks said about the situation as people are moving up to the line of having a properly integrated world system, one in which they can live and work anywhere, not just one which is only integrated through the UN Security Council. So to anyone who really follows politics, they should be able to see this. They should see exactly how governments are interpreting these events to their populations, and the fact that we need things to work in this way to move everything along. Yet the issue of the Anthropocene is coming into existence, and it's creating a massive paradigm shift which is changing everything. So really we need to learn how to handle this within the context of our current environment. The fact that people can see what's happening in the media means that people can move into the next phase where governments can take a more open stance about the facts we did not get yesterday, but we must move forward into a world of our own making. So it thus makes sense for people to be honest with themselves about the problems that we have and use both internal and external dialogue to create feedback and improvements in the way we do things. This has meant that only very few people have access to all the information available due to the hierarchy within the system. And we have to delineate most of the world's problems onto people who do not possess this overview, although people of a certain level are expected to understand it, thus creating the 1%, as not only do they expect to get paid for doing this, but they need massive security measures in place around them and to keep people relatively dependent on them for information and ultimately needing to work for them to earn wealth. Hence, this has created a culture which does not question the way things are done. As we move into a time when people need to be briefed on this shift to the new age which is emerging, as it needs to be part of their understanding of current affairs. So, like I've said before, it is the problem with the Anthropocene period coming into existence that will start people thinking about things like the problem of terrorism, the fascists wanting to create a totalitarian superstate, and the creation of fake news and all sorts of issues. With the correct understanding we can get from looking at how periods evolve, who knows then what we could achieve in terms of the long-term goals and new ideas that the Anthropocene might bring. Certainly we could eradicate the insanity born of the idea that wrong things simply have to keep happening simply because this is the way things are supposed to be. But to bring this change, the world needs a social movement which gathers momentum and not one which is destroyed by governments as its ideas are stolen and used for other things, leaving it look like an alternative view for society. And this is why I think the Anthropocene movement will be very diverse and dynamic enough to keep creating its new ideas so the subject cannot be controlled by state politics or media. It must continually show people that they can formulate new ideas for themselves rather than be forced to become aware of the conflict between governments and a new type of extremist who wants to create their own direction for society. Hence, the way the situation is developing in the West at the moment is the amount of individualism and acceptance of different perspectives is creating a type of society which is ungovernable. And you can imagine the chaos involved if people get caught up in the type of social movements which may emerge if the politicos get their hands on it before the government manages to give people a sane explanation for what's happening. So, hence the way the situation is developing then in the East is that the Chinese authorities, having taken responsibility for the International Union of Geological Sciences, now based in the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing, would appear to be slow and ponderous in assisting the Anthropocene Working Group to get their paper to prove the existence of the Anthropocene officially accepted. So this is why we need to create an active debate over the Anthropocene, certainly from a Western perspective, because of the feeling that the situation is being locked down and controlled from the other side of the world. Basically, we also are going to have the issue then that nothing seems to be getting done in a coherent manner coming out of Africa, or the idea that things are only getting half done, and people being lost in the Americas with insufficient information about how the world situation has evolved. So what I recommend is people try to get as close to the educated perspective as they can, it runs across the whole, and that means understanding the way that periods of human history fit into life on Earth, which itself fits onto the geological time scale, as we needed a planet to evolve on. The relationship between these three, mathematically speaking, provides a shifting formula that can be used by individuals to find their own perspective on the way the whole thing's evolved, and also specific events within that. So basically, that's the definition of intelligence right now, while the stupid people are the ones that are caught up in their own issues. And it's all religions point to this in their own way at the moment, and you can get that confirmed. In the West, people will need to have the idea of self-regulation, while on the Eastern side, they'll need to understand why governments are behaving like they are. In Africa, they will need to create self-determination because of the effect of the way the world has evolved upon this cradle of humanity there. If we can see the new centre ground emerging and now involving the way events continue to evolve, then we should see there is a type of humanist approach which balances common sense with individuality, and while the continents remain fundamentally separated by their own politics, they are conjoined in a certain way which will enable ideas to flow through the system more, rather than evolve separately in different places, ultimately reducing the need for conflict resolution within the world system, while allowing nations to maintain their sovereignty. So we can see the situation involving humanity at large moving into a winning position overall, but it implies that people have more of a shared understanding of the situation, as the global perspective is becoming an overarching principle, which everyone who can must see to reach a balanced view on, because the world order problem is by no means over. In fact, the journey towards creating a level playing field in so many people's lives has only just begun.